I believe there are some new faces in the room, new people who've come this afternoon, not here this morning. There is, of course, going to be available a full record of the proceedings, but to give you a snapshot of what we've been doing this morning, we had an introductory explanation from me about why the tribunal came into being and how it's going to be operated. And we then had a series of witnesses. We started with an expert witness dealing with an overall view of what is said to be the history of suffering by the Falun Gong in respect of organ transplants. Then we've had a couple of particular witnesses, or three is it, who've given evidence of their own circumstances of detention and in particular of being tested medically in circumstances that might be unexplained, and also of their torture. Anything else I should add? No. That's the best I can do for a summary, and then we'll see how we're doing now. It's inevitable that we, I suppose, were likely to suffer some technical problems when you're video conferencing with witnesses from different places. And I think what we're going to do is take out of order a witness who may be able to give us some expert assistance. And if, for those of you who are sticking with the program from beginning to end, I'll just see if that's going to work. Yeah. We're sorry you'll have to patch things together later, but we're now going to call, just check. There's a bit of a negative coming from the administration desk. Thank you. Mr. Sabi, are you happy to take at least half an hour of this witness?
Excuse me. Is Dr. Wang here?
Mr. Robertson is here, yes.
Mr. Robertson is here?
Yeah, he's in the back. Yes. Okay.
I'm sorry that you're taken a little bit by surprise, but with a full house of members of the public, I think it's important that we should use the time. Mr. Roberts is an expert who will be able, I'm sure, to help us, although he may come back later on. Mr. Robertson, you are Matthew Robertson?
Yes.
And Mr. Robertson, you've heard me say to other witnesses that it's very important that the evidence you give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I understand.
You've prepared reports, and in maybe slightly less well choreographed way than might otherwise be the case, we'll start hearing from some of your expertise on the matter. Yes, Mr. Sabi.
Thank you. Mr. Robertson, can you tell the tribunal about your studies in Chinese and what you have researched on this issue?
Sure. I'm a research fellow in Chinese studies at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. It's a non-profit in Washington, D.C. And I'm beginning PhD doctoral studies at the Australian National University in political science, and my thesis is focused on the development of organ transplantation in China. And I'm fluent in Chinese and have worked as an interpreter and a translator for a number of years.
You say that you have reviewed hundreds of Chinese medical papers about organ transplantation.
Yes.
Can you tell the tribunal what your conclusion is about those studies that you have made?
Well, so the purpose of reviewing when it comes to reviewing the papers, in that case, that's for a forthcoming publication about potential violations of the dead donor rule. So that's a specific issue that I think I was referring to in that case. Generally, the way I'm approaching the study of this issue is to, well, at least one part of it is collecting everything that has been published in Chinese medical journals. So currently we have, so I say we because I've worked with a data engineer to scrape and organize a database of all Chinese language medical publications. We have 120,000 so far. And in the course of my doctorate, it will be at least, one part of it will be to analyze this corpus. And so to extract data on how many, whatever you can find from such a large body of literature. For example, how many transplant surgeons have there been that have published papers on, on all kinds of transplantation in China? How many were clinical? How many non-clinical? What is the growth in the number of transplant surgeons over time? Everything you would want to know. How many hospitals have performed, have hosted surgeons that have published research on organ transplants? How many clinical, non-clinical? All the questions that we have about the system, whatever can be found from these public records will be part of what I'm, the data that we're extracting from it. It will get more complicated too because it may be possible to get an idea of the number of transplants that have been reported in Chinese papers. But that will get very complex because of many factors that probably would not necessary to say right now. If you're interested, we could go into that, but it's technical and gets complex.
I think we need to get into technicality because the numbers are important for the tribunal. This morning we had Mr. David Mattis suggesting figures between 60,000 to 100,000 transplant a year, but he was not confident about the numbers. Can you throw some light on that and take the tribunal as to what are the numbers and what are the complexities that you're referring to?
Sure. Look, let me use this one because I'm leaning uncomfortably. The issue with the numbers, so the way I'm approaching it, is that that there are two issues that are relevant in the consideration of the numbers, at least as far as I'm concerned. The first and the most important is the trajectory over time and whether they're explicable, whatever they happen to be, whatever the numbers happen to be, whether they can be explained with the official Chinese government explanation of death row prisoners. So whether, that is to say, whether the number of transplants is 30,000 a year, 20,000 a year, 40,000 a year, or whether it's 60 to 100 or whatever it happens to be, once you kind of break the threshold of it's more than can be credibly explained at all by death row, both in volume and in trajectory, which is very important because even, let's say, in the end, we're able to, through a lot of fancy coding, get the number of transplants and with no duplicates that have been performed in China according to published medical papers. Let's say that we can get that number, which is going to be a lot of hassle. That will not be the number of transplants that have been performed, obviously, because it will only be the ones that have been reported in medical papers. So I hope to get that number. But so the key is really what is the growth over time, and then in the two periods that I'm looking at is post the year 2000, specifically around the year 2000, and then in 2007. Because in 2007, so the official explanation of the Chinese government is that, at least the official explanation since 2006, has been that all transplants have come from death row prisoners. In 2007, in January 1st, 2007, the Supreme People's Court re-centralized the authority to review death penalty cases. And this meant that instead of the provincial high courts just sort of signing off on whatever the lower courts, the sentences that had been given, the SPC was exercising its review authority, and the number of death penalty cases, according to all researchers of the death penalty in China, dropped precipitously. And there's a lot of evidence of this, although there's disagreement because people, including researchers of this issue, are generally mistrusting of anything about the Chinese criminal justice process, and so have kind of disregarded this as kind of propaganda from China about increased transparency and increased judicial oversight over the death penalty process. There I think it's still it's an important thing to consider, because if there was a drop in death penalty executions in the year 2007, which I think there is a great deal of evidence to suggest, then the increase, the continued growth and even the increasing growth in the transplant system, there are huge questions about where those organs are coming from. And that's, what is the focus of this tribunal, like, are those prisoners of conscience? Lead me.
Would it be, in your opinion, possible to continue with this rate of growth, relying on donation from ordinary people in China, bearing in mind the massive population there, and even using the death row bodies after their execution? Would it be possible to answer the questions as to the source of organs?
Do you mean from the year 2000 to the present?
Yes, from the year, or from say 2006, that this practice of, they said that they have reduced the number of death penalties, and in fact they might have. To present, would you be able to find alternative theories as to the sources of the organs that are used apart from political or prisoners of conscience?
Right. Well, so we can take it in two parts. So the first, and the one that is most easy to address, is voluntary citizen donors. So, not prisoners of any type. So there's relatively more transparency about this, at least in terms of the official claims, than other donor sources, perhaps for obvious reasons. Myself and Dr. Jakob Levy and a statistician, Dr. Raymond Hind, have a forthcoming paper specifically about this issue. It's a forensic statistical analysis of China's voluntary transplant data. Because it's under peer review, and there are some concerns that if we discuss it publicly before it's published, that will create difficulties. I can't talk about it in detail, but suffice to say, we looked at all the official data on the donations, and the official data is not trustworthy, let's just put it that way. So we have the full analysis coming soon. But in any case, officials don't claim that donors were a significant portion, part of the transplant mix in China until around 2015 anyway. And many doctors at the top of the system have said there were, and they give roughly the same number, which to me makes it reliable, coming from different sources at different times, and that is that it's about 119 voluntary deceased donors from the beginning of transplantation in China until 2009. So 119 voluntary deceased donors. So that means every other, until 2009, according to the official statements, were prisoners of some type or other, by definition, deceased donors. So 2010 to 2015, they have a data series that says, it's 33, then 176, then, the numbers grow very rapidly from then on. Those numbers are highly problematic. But in any case, they can't explain, what we are interested in. So we can put that aside because even according to official explanations, they don't claim that voluntary citizen donors account for the activity. So then the question is, the death penalty. So that, basically this is the design of my dissertation, where it's like I'm looking at the two explanations, like the death row explanation and then, prisoners of conscience or non-death row prisoners. Basically, from what, so not to preempt the study, but basically from what I can see at present, to explain it using death row, you would have to envisage a death row system that has operated at a scale far beyond what anyone who studies the death penalty system in China is aware of, perhaps including judges in the SPC who, to give you an example, the reason that we know a bunch about how the SPC judicial review process works is because, the people that serve as judges for a time, they go back to being law professors at Peking University, for example, and then they give interviews with the media and they talk about, the office was this big and then they wheeled the files to my desk and there were 40 judges and, they talk about the whole process. And there are scholars in China who study this and they speak with judges and they speak with police and they speak with lawyers. Courts, particularly the courts in Guangdong, have been fairly earnest and forthcoming in publishing the death penalty sentences in their provinces. That's Guangdong is one, Zhejiang is another. And so there's pretty good data on those. And so scholars, Chinese scholars and Chinese American scholars have collected years of data for cases for for some years there is very good data in some provinces. And those roughly accord with slightly less than 10,000 executions annually. And then you've got all the other factors that make that, so there's only that many for starters, but then there is the issue of coordination, because there's no system for getting organs from one area of China to another. There's the issue of health. In terms of the bloodborne diseases and so on, that's not, so I literally typed in, bloodborne disease, prisoners, China in an academic database and got at least a dozen papers that are we did a sample of prisoners in this province in a certain prison and found X, and they're some of them are over 50%, many over 30% of Hep B and other diseases that would disqualify transplantation. So part of my work will be to, see what the average is and how many death row prisoners that would be written off. But in any case, if you were looking at two explanations for the transplant activity, in one case you would have to have a very complex conspiracy. In either case, there's a conspiracy afoot, obviously. In the case where you do everything through the death penalty system, the complexity of the conspiracy is actually appears to be far more complex, because you would have to keep this whole number of death row prisoners kind of off the grid somehow, and then they're still going through the court process. So I will be trying to come up with how this could possibly work, but it appears, the more parsimonious explanation is simply that there's a non-death row population that's being extrajudicially executed for their organs. But it gets very detailed when you're talking about...
Yes. Is there a requirement under Chinese law that within a certain fixed period the death sentence has to be carried out.
Yes, the criminal procedure law states that within 7 days of the approval of the sentence by the SPC.
So that would not leave any possibility for making an appointment, for instance, for in 20 days' time to come and receive organ when you don't know whether the death sentence has been approved or not.
You're saying that that contradicts the immediate availability of organs, potentially, and you're asking for my opinion on that, right?
You can, only once the death sentence has been passed, you
Yes.
can determine with some clarity as to when that organ would become available, but not before that. So there is a 7-day window,
Yes.
if you can say that that organ can be utilized. And in your experience, is that how the Chinese transplantation system had worked?
Well, so, I mean, we can look at it from two sides. So as far as the transplantation system goes, it's quite clear that there has been, and it appears there still is, widespread immediate availability of organs. This is clear from the ratio of emergency transplants that were performed, according to data from the China Liver Transplant Registry in 2005 and 6, which, by the way, by 2011, the China Liver Transplant Registry was no longer reporting the number of urgent versus elective surgeries. So the urgent liver transplantations take place when a patient presents to a hospital with liver failure, and the matching then takes place, and then the transplant is effected within. Papers I say about the definition of emergency transplants talk about between 24 and 72 hours, but there are some that refer to instances as short as 4 hours. But in any case, the only way to explain that, except for, again, a very complex kind of web of coincidences, is that there is execution on demand. So, is it death row prisoners who have been sentenced to death and had their sentence approved, and then they are kept on standby? Or is it, a non-death row population that's been kept as an organ bank? So if it was the first, again, it would require that the death penalty system, if that explanation is to hold for for explaining all the activity or a large portion of it, again, the death penalty system would have to be operating in a way that no one who studies it believes it is operating and has, seen it operating. For example, death row prisoners are publicly sentenced and then marched out and shot. There's also many cases, it's widely known, and even by Huang Jiefu says that death penalty prisoners are taken out and shot, like at an execution site. And there are human rights advocates who are aware of the short time between sentencing and approval of sentence and the execution. They believe it's far too short and doesn't give the time for proper justice. And so all those are reasons that would indicate that there's some other source for those emergency transplants. That is not death row prisoners. And then there's simply the problem of the only way that hospitals get access to death row bodies, so to speak, is because they have direct relationships with those particular prisons in that region, in that city. And so then you still have the issue of how do all the hospitals across China be able to get immediate availability of organs. It doesn't match with what is known about how death row operates.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. There is one more question I would like you to address. Do you have a book in front of you with all the witness statements?
He doesn't at the
I do
moment.
not.
Can you provide that to Mr. Robertson? If you go at page 308 of that book, there is a section with profiles of transplant surgeons.
Yes.
Have you authored this report?
I authored the one on Zhang San. I didn't author any of the others.
So this is Zhang Sushen is your...
Yes. Yeah, I read that.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes.
Mr. Robertson, thank you very much for coming in and filling the gap. We may ask you to come back, but for the time being, I know some of my colleagues have questions to ask. Sorry, did you have another one? Oh. I'll have to repeat all that. Thank you very much for coming to fill in the gap. We may ask you to come back later because we're going to hear other evidence to which we thought your evidence would most likely best fit after we've heard it. But I know some of my colleagues have questions to ask you.
Okay. Mr. Robertson, just to begin with, you mentioned in your statement that you've read hundreds of Chinese medical papers because you are also fluent in Mandarin and you can read Mandarin. In the studies that you've read, have any of the internal papers discussed criticism by the international community on organ harvesting in China?
Well, so medical papers don't deal with that kind of thing. That's in Chinese media reports. Do you want my read on what Chinese officials say when... Right. So, I mean, this is a big deal for the officials that deal with transplants in China. For example, Huang Jiefu has said that part of the impetus for reform in China was outside criticism, and he categorized it in two groups. One are the anti-China voices, which unfortunately might be many of those present, and tribunals like this that look into this, what is considered, highly political issue of whether prisoners of conscience have been harvested. So he said there are the anti-China ones, and then there are the the transplantation profession, and who have been concerned with seeing a voluntary donation system constructed in China, and that due to this pressure, they're affecting the reform to show how China is a rule of law country and so on and so forth. So this is taken very seriously, and it's similar with Huang Jiefu's admission, so to speak. It's only an admission if it's in fact true, but his statements, at least in 2005 and 2006, that in fact it was death penalty prisoners all along and not volunteers, as had been claimed until then, that were the source of organs in China. And that was also explained as a response to international pressure. So I think that's definitely plays a significant role. And Huang Jiefu has been, he's very attentive to that, and you could understand his immense efforts in making inroads with the international transplant community and ensuring that that transplant surgeons work within the framework provided by the Chinese state and Dr. Huang. His efforts indicate how important that is to keep them all on side, so to speak, that they're not looking into this. In other words, that they're focused on building a voluntary system and not asking too many other questions.
Is there an integration of international standards when it comes to how the transplants are done?
Do you mean does China follow international standards?
Well, the medical community, among the papers that you've read and the studies that you've read.
It's an interesting question. They claim that they do, but then that becomes a matter of drilling into the detail, right? So, for example, in some of the papers that we've been looking at closely in terms of whether there have been violations of the dead donor rule, in those cases, the donors are identified as brain dead, but they're identified as such in a way that makes no sense by how the definition of brain death medically has to be arrived at. So we could discuss that, but that's one thing. But there are the huge number of Chinese papers about, is people padding their resume to some degree perhaps, but it's simply, thoughts about transplant ethics in China. There's countless papers of that type, and then they reflect on international standards and how China intends to develop in that direction and so on. But it's also important to know that the system that, at least as they present it, so if you're putting aside questions of prisoners of conscience and extrajudicial killing and so on, that it was already claimed that China was adhering to standards because they had sought consent from the donors. Okay. And prisoners, they're citizens too, and so they have the right to donate.
And so let's talk about, you do mention brain death and the debate on that within the communities there. What is their current definition of brain dead, and what are the ethical debates that are around that?
Well, it's the international definition. The clinical guidelines simply adopt the internet, so that the brainstem is damaged or there's cessation of neurological activity, and but the individual is still alive by, their heart is still beating, and then there are a bunch of tests for that brain death is truly in effect, so to speak. But so in the papers that we're looking at, it's the issue of that those tests are absent. It's more than that. But so they're on, you'll find all the, most of it, they're not drawing a difference in terms of how they diagnose brain death or how they say that they diagnose brain death. There's no brain death law in China, but they say that these clinical guidelines serve as, as sufficient to carry out transplants. Although there are some papers that say that we don't do brain death transplants because of legal issues. So it seems that some hospitals are afraid of being sued. This is like post-2015. And that's in cases where, there could be actual potentially brain dead donors.
Okay. I think someone else on the panel had a...
Yes, I think, first of all, I guess, forgive me, Mr. Robertson, on timetable, Mr. Sabi, how pressed are we, or how do we have slack?
No, we have the next witness ready to come as soon as you finish this.
Very well.
Yes.
And given that Mr. Robertson will come back, we'll limit the amount of questioning now. I think Mr. Vetch has one particular question.
Do you want to do it now or
yes,
later?
Right now.
Mr. Robinson, it's a sort of overarching question, this. So if we accept that there are only three sources of organs, it's from death penalties, it's from voluntary donation, and it's from forced extraction, then therefore there are only four variables. And if we looked at the statistical attribution of those four variables, given that two of them, by the sounds of things, are relatively small compared to the largest one being, the two smaller ones being voluntary donations and death row penalty extraction, the difference, therefore, between those two and the total number of transplants is, by definition, the forced extraction. Is it, in your view, and I appreciate that you haven't concluded all your academic research on it, in your view, is there a difference likely to exist? And if there is a difference that's likely to exist, is it going to be a small difference or a very significant one?
So I think so. It's a significant difference, I think, but we don't know what it is because we don't know how many transplants have taken place, and we don't know how many death penalty prisoners there have been annually. So the reason that there's something to study here is simply because without knowing the exact numbers, we can still know that, or at least we can be highly confident, according to all available evidence, that there's a big disparity in both the trajectories and the volumes, even though we can't know exactly what they are. So yes, I think it exists. It is inexplicable, as without accounting for some non-death row population, and it's not addressed by Chinese, the Chinese government, and it's sizable and highly significant. Absolutely.
So the point of my question really is if you attributed the most generous attribution to death row and to voluntary donation, will it, in your view, at this stage of your research, likely result in a significant gap between that and the total number of transplants?
I think so, but what I want to do is try to come up with the most generous use of the death row explanation as I possibly can. And yeah, but even then you have a lot of difficulty because you're already disqualifying half of the death row population due to these blood-borne diseases, and that's not a small thing. And then there's the whole coordination issue. Like, can you assume that they got 3 organs from each death row prisoner? Probably not. Not even 2 necessarily. And so I'm also interested in how trying to find, for example, some papers that talk about how many organs they're able to get per donor, but it's very hard to find papers that discuss it in that way, and it seems implicitly that many of them is a single organ. And there are some references by Chinese doctors to organ wastage and that many hospitals haven't been able to use multiple organs per donor. And also it's probably shifted a great deal over time when there was a surfeit of organs in earlier years and maybe less later on. And so many things that you don't actually know. You can just infer it from other information, and I think it's probably like that. For example, Ethan Gutman, another researcher of this issue, interviewed someone who waited. It was a peasant, and this was in some kind of a hospital that wasn't, I think, in a major city. I'm perhaps remembering wrongly. In any case, the point is he waited 3 months, I believe. Ethan would be able to clarify. But so in that case, I would imagine that perhaps it is the case that there was someone else who was being executed, and then he just got the spare liver, for example, kidney, for example, it was. And then you could kind of see, okay, maybe that's how it would, but that would just be a guess too. I'm not sure if that helps.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's those who don't do transplantation won't probably know that the management of the donor really affects the outcome of the transplantation. So the way the donor organs are looked after. So irrespective of whether people are being executed from death row or whether they are prisoners of conscience who in some way are committed to death to have their organs removed, the mode of execution becomes very relevant to the outcome. And as I understand it, and perhaps you'd answer this as a second part of the question, that there is no organ tracing, nor organ tracking, nor outcome reporting as a compulsory thing in China, as we would have in say, the UK or America, that a registry which would look for both those things, the organ tracking and the outcome. So I'm worried here about the mode of execution and how controlled or uncontrolled that is, and what impact that has on, as you imply, the numbers of organs and what you can do with them, and then the outcome. It all links to how the data flow. And I wondered if you'd like to comment on that track.
Yeah, well, I would just say that this is an issue of great interest to me. And also, I mean, it's just extremely difficult to figure this stuff out. I'll just give an example. So like the papers I'm dealing with, right, they're written in Chinese and they're medical papers. So I don't even understand everything I'm reading in an English language medical paper. I have no medical training. So what I've done is looked at a lot of textbooks in English about organ transplantation and clinical procedures, watched a lot of YouTube videos, spoken to a lot of surgeons, and then go back to the Chinese papers and try to figure out what's going on. And so I've spent, like half a day figuring out that one of the surgical procedures that was being described was the excision of all abdominal organs. So kidney, liver, the whole lot, all out at once. And then they did the bench work. You'll know the exact terminology, but then they separated and perfused. So stuff like that, it's just like a huge hassle to figure this stuff out, like what's going on in this. What appears clear is that there was a shift in mode of execution, so to speak, because you can't, for example, like there's almost no liver transplants in China pre-2000, very few. Post-2000, the curve is really exponential. So obviously, as you would know, livers are much more sensitive to ischemic damage. And so that is indicative of a shift in, they're executing people in a different way, and perhaps the execution process is much more closely connected with the organ extraction process, which you would expect. A lot of the papers that myself and, working with a cardiac transplant surgeon, Dr. Levy, are looking at, they're taking place in what is clearly a clinical context. So it appears in those cases that when brain death is declared, it's being falsely declared. And the cause of death is the clamping of the aorta and the pleging, cardioplegic solution that stops the heart. And then the heart is removed, and that appears to be the moment of death. And that's, so apart from simply the fact that you can't do that out, on an execution site, but there is reference to, for example, being able to measure the pressure of the perfusion solution, and a device that is able to do that, according to Dr. Levy, this is happening in a clinical setting. So at least in those cases where we have those medical papers, we know that this if in fact it's an execution, but it's not someone's not being shot in the head, it would certainly appear, and then, there's an incision and the kidney's taken out, like the one witness, Wang Guoqi, except for Anvatoti, but who worked in China in the death penalty system, describes that kind of thing, and that is how Chinese officials have portrayed the execution process. Yes, but it appears that there was, that's not how all these organs are being obtained, that, the execution is happening with the extraction, and it's in a much more clinical setting.
So just to re-emphasize that point, that implies, or you are implying by that answer, that medically trained personnel of one origin or another are directly involved in something which approaches the execution of a prisoner.
That's what we're looking at now indicates, certainly. So we're very much looking forward to getting this published and subjecting it to peer review. And, there might be a process in that case of the journals contacting those doctors who are named and so on and so forth.
And the final point, which we kind of assumed but glossed over, was that there is no structured, compulsory registry for all of the information that's associated with transplant management.
We don't know what's in their registries. So the only registry data that we have comes from, the China Liver Transplant Registry, not the registry data itself, but the aggregate statistics from it were published in 2005, 2006. We have those. 2011, we have that annual report, but it doesn't have all the you would expect. It's got the donor, it's got the name, it's got some other information, and then so we don't have. So they may be keeping that, but we don't know how much they keep, and all the other registries are closed. The other thing is in this forthcoming paper, we collect all the references to official record keeping of transplant activity in China, and there's about a dozen, and then show whether they're open or closed. So it's like close. There are many agencies like the National Health and Family Planning Commission, formerly the Ministry of Health. They have records because there's references to their records in medical papers. The Chinese Society of Transplantation, which is a branch of the Chinese Medical Association, has records because their data is referred to. Hospital information systems must keep track of at least they may not keep track of the donor if it's taking place in this black box way, but at least they would have the recipient. And then there's all the immunosuppressant data. So hospitals are dispensing those drugs; they would have records of that. And we could get into it separately, but the IMS figures, there's a lot of questions about that. We can really go down that rabbit hole later.
Mr. Robertson, one follow-on question, and then you're done, at least for the time being. I think that in your exchange with Professor Elliott, registration means record of where, is this right? Registration means record of where an organ comes from and where it goes. Is that what you mean?
In the context that I thought he was saying was that in a typical system where there's a donor, then you would have all that information. Yeah, but we don't know that they have that in China.
No, well, I have two follow-on questions. Does the public outpourings of the government of China recognize the appropriateness of having that kind of record?
I'm
does
sure.
Does it assert that it's a good thing to have that side of record and that it has them?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure if you ask Huang Jiefu, who would say, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, we're totally going to do that. We're working so hard on it right now.
But do they do it now? Do they say they're doing it now?
Certainly for voluntary donations that happen, so let's assume that they're all genuine, yes, then the idea is that this is happening in exactly the same way that Dr. Elliott would be familiar with.
So that if Mr. Vetch's image of total being A plus B plus C is a reasonable way for us to look at it, and if there's a gap, a missing figure, maybe B or maybe A, I can't remember which it was, for which there is no registration, is that itself significant?
The thing is that we really don't know that the official registries are even picking up all the transplant activity that is actually going on. Because if you had, prior to 2006, the only piece of written, so these were temporary regulations, not even a law, but the temporary regulations of 1984 that allowed the use of executed prisoners' bodies, that was the only thing on the books about organ transplantation. So literally, it's totally blank until 2006 when it was announced that they would be preparing, legislation and so on. By the way, that announcement came almost exactly 1 week after the Falun Gong allegations first emerged. So the timing is significant. And then in 2007, there was the law. But so I'm just saying that there was no institutionalization of this, of management, record keeping, clinical procedures, nothing. It was a Wild West until at least 2007. Hospitals across China, they might have their own records, but it doesn't mean that they're being reported up to a centralized system, that the ones that are kept centrally are in fact what. So if we got access to the hospitals, what you'd be looking at is, you'd want to know, then you would know each hospital, if their information system was accurate from the beginning, then you might know, especially with the dispensing of immunosuppressant drugs.
And if you had the keys to all the cabinets, and if there were Falun Gong executions for the purpose of organ harvesting, would you be able to find in all those cabinets documents showing who was used for which organ?
I suspect that, so first of all, you mean that would have to include every agency that was involved, the 610 office, the labor camps, the prison administration. There would be a great many agencies involved. I suspect you still wouldn't, because if the whole idea is that these people were out, say, handing out literature, and then they were intercepted by police or they were reported and then they were arrested, and part of the reason that they were vulnerable to be harvested in the first place was because they didn't identify themselves, then you'd still see an XXX or a code name in the official files, one would think. because, there's so many anecdotes of a Falun Gong practitioner who has been detained and their cousin or their brother-in-law in the security system or who's knows people says, make sure your family comes to visit you, and doesn't explain why, but simply says it, make sure people visit you. The idea being that it appears people who are known and whose families know where they are and know how to find them are protected in a sense or treated differently to those that are completely nameless. So you still wouldn't, I don't see how you would, so in some cases you might know, but it would seem to me that it would be no benefit to keep, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of records when we eventually get our hands on them, which I'm confident will happen someday. But I can't imagine we would know in every case who the victims were.
Thank you very much for the time being. Mr. Vetch is breaking all the rules. Yes, Mr. Vetch.
Just one residual question. When we think about the various variables, as Sir Geoffrey's articulated them, could you just very briefly say, in terms of that attributable to voluntary donations, which, as I understand it, is under the auspices of the Red Cross, is that a relatively accurate collection of data and something that you would feel reasonably comfortable with relying upon?
No.
Right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sabi, who are we taking next? One way or another, we've used an hour, but it actually works out quite well, I think.
We are waiting for confirmation that Mr. Omar Bakari is online, and as soon as that is confirmed, we can proceed with...
Okay, well, we'll all sit here and wait, shall we?
Yes, I think so.
Right, thank you.
Is he coming?
I gather that, and everybody else, I gather that the connection is such that we will have an image, we will see the witness, we will see his lips moving, and it'll be a live image, but we won't be able to hear from him. So that a telephone connection has been made, and there will be indirect communication. I'm not sure whether it's going to be over the earphones or not. My respectful suggestion to you, Mr. Sabi, is that in those circumstances, one way you could approach this evidence he can hear us, would be by your reading fairly slowly the first.
Ömer, anlatamsınız bizimki avazımızı?
Yok, sizin avazınız. Mehmanlarınki yok.
So we can hear through the.
He can hear us. We can't hear him.
No, but we can hear the translation. That's.
And we can hear the interpreters. So it's earphones on, ladies.
Yes, earphone is on. Yeah, I can hear you as well. Ömer efendim, bugünkü şu faaliyetimizge hoş geldiniz.
Rahmet.
Siz qısqacha şu Xitayda özünüz Kazakhstan'ınki bir garajlarni turib nima uchun Xitayda siz qo'lga ilindingiz, bizga bir shuni bir tushuntirib bergan bo'lsangiz.
Okay. Bu yerda mundaq masala bor. Men 2006-yili Xitoydan Qozog'istonga ko'chib keldim. O'zim Qozog'iston.
Just a second, yes. Bir minut to'xtab tursangiz. Siz.
Okay.
Can you take this off and then if I see if I can hear him, then I can. Okay. Siz telefonga nima qilmay bevosita paranglashib baqsangiz, men anglalamdimki. Gap qilib baqsangiz hozir. Ha, bo'ldimi? Telefonga nima qilmasangiz-chi? Yes, gap qilib baqma. Yes, I can hear him, so I'd rather take the phone off now because I'm hearing two sound. That's why I now just stopped him. So we don't need telephone. I'm going to just talk to him directly. Sorry, sir, for that. Yeah. Bo'ldi. Anladım avazınızı. Şunlaşqa siz telefonda nima qilsangiz ikki ovoz keldi-chi. Şunlaşqa hozir ovoz chiqdi. Ha, bo'ldi. Telefonni o'chirib o'ting. Ha, telefonni o'chirib o'ting. Yeah, okay. Now we can just talk without having the mobile phone. So, endi siz başdan bana tushundirsiniz, men asta bularga sizningki shu abayqi degan savolga javobni deb beraman. In 2006, I moved to Kazakhstan. Siz Kazakhstan garajlarni shunaqmi? Kazakhstan pasport bor sizda, ha? Yes, I obtained a Kazakh passport, a Kazakh citizenship in 2008. Üçüncü ayda 2017-yili 3-cü ayda Kazakhstan'a kelgan vaqtida sizning Qozog'iston Xitoyga kelgan vaqtida Xitoy sizni tutdi, shundaqmi? Yeah, 22nd of March 2017. Yeah, I went to Urumqi to attend Astana trade exhibition. I finished the conference on the 26th of March, and then I visited my family home in Pichan, where I was arrested. Ular sizga nima uchun sizni tutganligi to'g'risida xabar berdimi? No explanation. There was no explanation. Police came to my parents' house, and I was handcuffed and a hood placed over my head and pushed into a police van, and I was taken. 2017 11 aygachilik sizni turmada tutib turibdi. Yes, March 26 to November the 24th, I was in prison. Shu mezgil jarayonida sizni nima uchun tutganligi demidi, shundaqmi? During the torture, the interrogation, they have accused me of joining separatist movement, organizing terrorist or supporting the terrorism. Yani desiniz boldu, men düşendirme. Without shred of evidence, they have interrogated and tortured in order for me to admit all these accusations, which I never did because I have never committed or connected to any of what they have accused me of. Muşu jarayonda sizni 2 qitim badan tekshirish qilibdi, sog'liq tekshirish. Muşu 2 qitimlikni bizga tushuntirib bera olamsiz?
Okay. Birinchi qitimda 3-ayning 26-kuni Ashpichan Naira doktorxonada o'ylayman, chunki doktorxonaning taraqlarida belgili bo'ladi.
On the 26th of March, I was taken to Pichan. I believe it was a Pichan hospital, as I had a hood over my head, but from the smell and some conversation, what I heard, I believe it was Pichan hospital.
Men orada tekshirish yo'liqishimdan qattiq qo'rqdim, chunki men Qozog'istondagi hayotimda nurg'unlagan anglagan, bular Falun Gongchilarni, hatto boshqa Uyg'ur bolalarniki, jinoyatchilarniki organlarni ilib sotdi degan narsani.
I was terrified when I was taken for that test, because previously when I was in Kazakhstan, I heard about the practice, what the Chinese government doing to Falun Gong practitioners, also the Uyghur political prisoners, that they practice live organ harvesting, and I was terrified when I was taken to hospital.
Did they check all your body? Did they check your organs?
Qandaq nima tekshirishlar bo'ldimi? Shu tekshirishlarni bir deb bersangiz.
Tekşürgen vaqtida mening şu belden yuqorisinin hemmini salg'uz o'tib kiyim-kechaklerimni dumyat buzibmi tekshirdi.
After the urine test, and I was stripped off from the waist above, and then they draw blood from my arm, and I was placed on the bed and moved, rolled over chest to back. Yeah, draw blood from my arm a lot. It checked my lung. Urine sample.
Did they also put gel on your body?
They also put a cold gel, applied cold gel, and checked different part of my body, front and back.
Thank you. Did you receive any diplomatic protection from your government, that's government of Kazakhstan?
Kazakhstan devlet tarafından diplomatik sizge bir yardım boldu mu? Ular yardımcı boldu mu sizge?
7. ayının o'ttirisida Pekindeki bir konsul adamı, konsulxona xodimi, Urumchiga xizmat qilgan konsul xodimining 2 konsul adamı Karimaydagi bu turmisiga meni izlab keldi.
In mid-July, when I was in prison in Karimi, 2 officials from Beijing embassy visited me.
Thank you. The tribunal may have some more questions for you.
Belkim başqalarının sizden soraydigan suallar boluşu mümkün.
How or from whom in Kazakhstan did you hear of organ harvesting by China?
Yani kimden, qaysi kişilerden Xitayda muşundaq etkesçilik, organ etkesçilik bovatqanlığını anladınız?
Bunun içiga turmaning ichida vaqtida shu yerdagi bevosita
sualni yana bir qaytaday ham. Qozog'istonda vaqtingizda siz dedingiz shundaq narsalarni anglagandim, shuning uchun deganki shu savolga deydi. Siz Qozog'istonda mushu organ etkesçilikni angladim dedingiz, kimlardan anglagandingiz, qandaq anglagandingiz? Savolni diqqat qiling.
Buni anglaganda men Xitoycha axborot vositalariga ko'p diqqat qilaman odatda. Hatto YouTube'dagi bo'lsin, Facebook'dagi bo'lsin, mushunga oid xabarlarni men o'zim yaxshi o'qigan bir inson. Bu ashta axborotlarni ko'raman. Bu falangochlarga ashta quvvat qilgan ayni vaqtda vatan vaqtimizmi aspas anglagan, biroq aniq dalil isbot yo'q bo'lganligi uchun bilmadim. Qozog'istonda mush axborot vositalarimiz bo'yicha buni haqiqatan ko'z yetkazganmiz.
As well as hearing some friends, also because in Kazakhstan I am access to YouTube and other social media, and I watched some of the watched and read some information regarding the organ harvesting.
When you had 2 medical examinations, according to your statement, one on the 26th of March, one on the 7th of April. On either of them, had you complained of a medical condition needing a medical examination?
Siz 2 qitim şu sağlıq təkşirəbdi. Birisi 3-cü ayının 26-sı, birisi 4-cü ayının 7-si. Bu 2 qitimdə siz özünüzünki sağlıq doğruluq bir məsəl çıxdı digərliginiz üçün ula apadımı? Şundaq iş boldu mu?
Yo'q, məcburi.
No, it was forced health check.
And
every month when I was during my time in prison, every month they draw blood monthly.
You tell us you had a black hood over your head. Did the black hood stay over your head throughout the detailed medical examinations?
Siz beşinizge qar xalt kiygizi dediniz. Muşu tekşürüş jarayonida muşu xaltını bütünlay xalt tudumu deydi tekşürüş jarayonida.
Mening beşimde xaltı var.
Yes, I had the black hood.
You tell us in your statement that you were aware of records being made of the tests that lasted up to 2 hours on the second occasion.
Siz ikinci qitimliq muşu tekşiriş jarayonida 2 saatlik ötdiği vaqt depsiz.
Could you see the records being made or hear them being made?
Qarama şu türmeden açtı.
To'xtang. Avval sualni anglang, please. Sualni anglang. Siz 2 saat depsiz, 5'inizde qar xalta. Siz qandaq bunun yani başqalardan angladingizmi, kördingizmi bu vaqtni?
Manda gap. Meni saqchiqani qiyin qistab olib chiqqandan keyin u chaqda kunduz bo'ladigan. Meni tekshirishim tugatib apaga vaqtida lagerga kirgan vaqti, turmush apaga vaqti soat 9lar bo'lgan ekan. Mesela o qarmaydi shu chaqda 7lar kun o'tamaydigan vaqt. Shuni qarab 2 soatda tekshirishni esqab.
When I was taken from prison, it was daytime. It was in the afternoon, late afternoon. When I came back, returned back to prison, it was around 9 p.m. So I estimated that the time that I spent for all this test took about 2 hours.
Did you see the records being written or did you hear them being put onto a computer?
Ular shu tekshirish jarayonida buni qo'lida yazdimi, kompyuterga nim qildimi, aya anglab faraz qila oldingizmi, qandaq bo'ldi?
Shu tekshirgan nimalarni materiallarni dersiz? Hammasi kompyuterga ular qog'oz ishlatmaydi ekan. Mening shaxsan biraz yazganmayım yok. Hammasi kompyuterga bazaga tarqalgan bo'lishi kerak aniq.
I believe they recorded everything on computer. As I know that in China now, even in hospital, they record everything on computer.
You tell us in your witness statement that that at the time of the second medical examination, you had already been tortured. 2 questions. But first, was the torture that you suffered likely to harm your organs?
İkinci qitim sizni tekshirishga opirishning oldida sizni qiyin qistaqqa olgan, intayin qattiq zarbalarga uchirgan. Mening 2 savolim bor bu to'g'riliq. Birinchi savolim, sizni mushu apaga vaqtda sizcha mushu ig'ir zulmdan badaningizningki organlari zaxmlanganmi sizcha?
Endi ben bu yerda organı qattiq zaxm almadım deb o'ylayman, chunki ular meni qiynagan vaqtida asosliq shu go'sh, ya'ni nazuq yerlarga insonniki sunmaydigan yerlarga har xil qiyin qisqa qilish vosita bilan qiynaydi, ya'ni rezina kaltak, sim qamcha.
I don't believe that all that torture affected my organs because the beatings and the torture is often inflicted on muscles and on parts of the body that actually doesn't damage the organ, the internal organs.
In your second medical examination, but not in the first, you speak of the following 3 or 4 points: that your eyes were examined, that your fingerprints were taken, and that your voice was recorded. Was any explanation given to you for those particular examinations? Did you have any thoughts yourself about why they had been performed?
İkinci qitim sizni tekshirgan vaqtda ovozingizni opdi, qo'l izlaringizni opdi, ko'zingizni ichib, ko'zlaringizni ichib, ko'zlaringizga qarabdi va rasmga opdi. Buningda sizga nima uchun mushunda qilganligi to'g'risida bir tushuntirish berdimi?
Yo'q.
No.
Were you treated the same or differently from other prisoners, so far as you could judge?
Siz özünüzninki köz qarşı boyunca siz bilen başka şu yerdə tutub durulğan başka türmüdəkilər oxşaş ahvalda boldumu yoki fərqliq boldumu?
Men u yerda ko'rganlarim bo'yicha bo'lgan vaqtida
From what I saw inside,
farqi bor. Meniki
there is difference.
chet ellik bo'lish suhbati bilan
Because I was a foreign citizen,
yegan tayoqlarim ulardan farqli.
and even the torture I suffered was different.
Were
Odatda
other, sorry.
uning ichida men o'z ko'zim bilan ko'rdim. Tayoqdan o'lgan odamni ham bilaman.
I know, I've seen, and there are people tortured to death there in that prison. I know their names.
Börek ve ciğerleri kerekten çıkan ballarınki kan siygen halette öler halet kap qalğanlığını ötüzüm bilen görüp
I've
geldim.
seen, I witnessed also young men passing blood urine because of the beatings. The internal organ internally damaged because of the heavy beatings.
Were other prisoners, to your knowledge, sent for medical examinations of the kind you underwent?
Başka tür siz bilen birlikte tuğan ballamı şu tekşiriş ep verildi mi?
Hemmisi şundaq. Birinci uçratda her qanday mayli çoğun kichik demasdan aşında hemmisini yürek yürüyen evet halatda. Birinci uçratda doktorxonaga apırıp eng çoğun tekşirishni qilib bo'lib
all prisoners now, it's a common practice now that first they must go for a medical test before being placed in detention.
Yes, but you're telling us about March and April 2017. At that time, when you had a medical examination which made you fearful of organ harvesting, were other prisoners being sent, to your knowledge, for the same kind of medical testing?
Mening sualım sizning 3-nji ayning 26-njy güni hamda 4-nji ayning 7-nji güni muşu tekşiriş bolgan wagtida siz intayin qoqqan, belkim organingizni evitishi mumkin degan shuningdan ansirgan. Şu wagtda başqalarninki mo tekshirilganini ko'rdingizmi, bilamsiz?
Mening beshini 46 va men qanday bilaman.
Impossible for me to know. I had both time I had a black hood over my head.
And did you hear within the prison of others undergoing medical examination?
Türme özüde başqalardan aşı anladыңызmı? Ularmı şundaq tekşirişlerge ip berilganlığı toğrusida?
8 ay yetiş jarayonida qani 5-6 öýge almashtirildim. Şu anlıqda hemmisini şunda halat qattiq tekşirishni ötküzdüm. Hem her ayda kan ilinganligini öz gözüm bilen gördüm. Lekin tekşirip kirganligini hammasi şunda deyiklik.
Yes, everyone has experienced the same procedure. I was inside prison for 8 months, and I was moved to 5 to 6 different cells. And everybody that I have encountered or I heard that they all gone through exactly same medical test, and monthly the blood was taken.
And were these fellow prisoners of what nationality or ethnicity?
Bu türmüdekiler qaysı millettin? Başka milletler mi var mı? Qaysı milletler var?
Ben bir yataklıklı sözünü desem, bir yatakta 3'tün 4 kişi Kazak var, bir yatak Özbek var, kalan hemisi Uygur.
If I say in one cell and 3 to 4 are Kazakh ethnic, 1 Uzbek, and the rest are Uyghur people, are Uyghur people.
Yes. Of those who you knew to have been tested, did any disappear without trace?
Sizning mushu degan biladigan mushu tekshirish bo'lganlardan siz bilamsiz yo'qolib ketganlar bormi? Tuyuqsizlam yo'qolib ketganlar bormi?
O bir ikki emas bu yerda. Her yataktan haftada 3'tün, 4'tün, 5-6 bala çıkıp ketidi. İnsanlar yığılıp durdu. Biz ularni başka yataklarga chiqib ketdimikin veya ki lagerlarga olib ketdimikin, boshqalar jamiyatga qo'yib etdimikin deb o'ylab, men lagerga bordim keyin. Shu vaqtda chiqib ketgan insonlar o hatta lagerdami yo'q, boshqa lagerdagilardan bir-birimizni yatak almashtirgan ekan bilishimiz bizlarga yo'q.
Every week there was 3 to 4, sometimes 5 to 6 people were taken away. And at the time, I suspected maybe they were taken for re-education camps or maybe released. But later, I was in re-education camp. But these people, I believe they disappeared without trace. I am not talking 1 or 2 people. Every week there are 3 to 4, 5 to 6. Haftada 5'ten 6'da 3'ten 4 kişi yo'qolib ketadi dedingiz, shundaqmi? Yeah. Yes, they take them away and then they disappear.
You mentioned children or men over 18. Was it? What was the youngest person in prison with you?
Siz yaş balla bilen birli boldum deb siz en kichik yoshdagi qancha yosh?
15.
15.
How many young men of that sort of age were there with you?
Eşede qanchasi batdi? Shu yoshdagilardan qanchasi batdi siz bilan turmada?
Men ba'zida ikkisi bilan yotdim, ba'zida birisi bilan yotdim. Yatakdan alt yatak almashtirganlik uchun her yatakda 2-3 yosh bola bor.
Okay, as I have said, I've moved to 5 to 6 different cells. Each cell, there were 1 or 2 young children at that age.
You spoke of people who disappeared, not to be seen at the re-education camps. Were these very young men some of those who disappeared?
Bu yo'qolib ketganlarning ichida, abiyam dedingiz, mush yo'qolib ketdi, qaytib kelmadi. Bular shu yoshlarmi, bek yoshlarmi?
Asosiyatdan mana shu 15dan yuqori 40dan tuvanlar shunday holatda.
Mostly they are about 15 and below 40.
Why do you think you were released?
Siz nima uchun sizni qo'yib etdi? Sizcha nima sababdan ular qo'yib etdi sizni?
Agar Qozog'iston diplomatiya munosabatlarini meni izlamagan bo'lsa, ular menimi oldinburun qurbonlikqa chilib, lager
I believe it is because of the diplomatic pressure from the Kazakhstan and because I being a foreigner. If I were not a foreigner, I believe they must have taken my organs like what they did to other people.
And my last question is this. Is it possible that some of those who disappeared were simply released like you were?
Mening ham da eng oxirgi savolim, ba'zi kishilarningki chiqib ketishi, ya'ni yo'qolib ketishi, chiqirib o'tishi sizga o'xshash shundaq qo'yib o'tilganmi sizcha?
Yo'q. Chunki mening izlerigimda 8 oy jarayonida onam qayerga solangan, qayerda yotgan hech qanday izlari yo'q. Ham bermaklik. Men chatterlik bo'lgan bir ingrajan holatda bermaklik o jungo fuqarolarga o asla mumkin emas narsa.
I don't believe that because during 8 months when I was in prison, when my mother and my relatives inquired about my whereabouts, but the prison officers, none of the officials released any details about where I was kept. So I believe, and I am a Kazakh citizen, so for these people who are the Chinese citizen, it is very easy for the Chinese government just make them disappear.
Thank you very much for making yourself available to give evidence. I'm sorry it was a little tricky administratively, But thank you very much.
Köp rahmet. Biraz bir problemler oldu. Biraz mesele çıktı. Onun keçirim sorayımız.
Okay.
Ama bugün sizinki bu belgen şu ispatınız biz için intayın mühim. Sizge köp rahmet.
Köp rahmet.
Thank you.
Ben her an sizlere tayyorman hizmet qilishga.
I'm
Thank you very
always
much.
ready
Goodbye.
to help. Thank you.
O'chirmasam bo'lamda?
We finished with this witness. The next witness, who is?
The next witness is you, okay? She's joining us online.
Yeah. Just very good. Yeah. Good witness. Good witness.
Martin, is it possible to deduce from a certain type of examination doctors are looking for a particular thing?
Okay, thank you.
By which I think you mean if they have test X or Y, does that
Are they looking for X, Y, or Z?
No, I mean not in this, not in the detail that we're being offered here. So in theory, there would be, to most circumstances, you would have tests. There's no point in doing
Ms. Liu's statement are from pages 45 in the book in front of you.
Thank you very much.
Just remember to switch between English and other, please, yeah?
Can you check what is happening? When are we getting it? It's just on the...
Seems very little. I'm doing the blood test, so you could imagine looking for a fraction, so you don't spread out twice. It would be really nice to know what tests they've actually made. And I don't know how
The eye testing is presumably reasonable from the point of view of organ harvesting, or isn't it?
Well, you could be looking for trachoma from some doctor.
Did I make a lot of mistakes?
No. A few places.
English, obvious grammatical.
Good afternoon, Ms. Liu. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Liu, thank you for giving a statement. Mr. Chairman, would you like to ask her the question about it?
Thank you very much for coming or being available to help us. And please, thank you very much for being available to help us with your evidence. Please remember how important it is that you tell us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Yes?
Which channel? 刘女士，您听见我吗？啊，所以
Yeah, I can. 我的
所以他们这个什么，就是说，法官席的想提醒您一下，今天您说的一定要事实，也只能是事实，这个您清楚吗
Yes, 我清楚。Yes.
Yes. 您想说英语还是想说中文？
说中文。
Chinese.
Yeah, Chinese.
您被拘留4年，有没有通过法律的程序？
没有。
No. Because it's Skype, I don't think it's on the 2 channels.
If you speak English there, if you speak other, speak there.
No, if I...
Somehow she cannot hear
the Chinese.
when she switched, so he's okay. Just one. Both.
Sorry, we have a bit of a technical problem here.
Through to us.
Yeah. It's not going through.
Yeah, so that's why we have that.
Could you repeat the question, please? 您被逮捕的唯一原因是不是您是法轮功的学员？
对，
Yes,
是
it
的。
is. 您在4年间总共被体检8次，您也提供具体的材料。
Yes, 是的。
您能讲述一下这个体检的原因是什么？他们为什么要做这些体检？
就是关押我们的警察说，法轮功的这些人
The police who
必须体检。
who were responsible for us said that Falun Gong practitioners had to go through such physical checks.
这是当时他们这个就是他们的决
At the time, it
定。
was their decision.
其他的关押人员可以不体检。
People who are not Falun Gong practitioners, the other inmates, they didn't have to go through such checks. 在您所被关押的监狱里面，劳教所里面有没有很多的法轮功学员？
北京的一个女子劳教所就关了700个法
There
轮
was 700 female Falun Gong practitioners in one labor camp alone in Beijing. 您做体检的结果报告有没有收到？
警察跟我说，
The police
这
said
个
to
东
me
西他都不知道，
even the police didn't know these things.
这是国家机
This is
密。
state secret. 您能不能和法官席说一下您的被受折磨的经历，在狱中受折磨的经历？
就是记忆最深的一次就是2001年的3
The
月
case
5
that I
号。
remember the most is was the 5th of March. 请问几年？2001
2001年3月5号。
5th of March 2001. 请继续。
就是当时就是他们审问了我有12个晚上，我都没有说
At
话。
the time, they continually questioned me for 12 nights, and I didn't speak.
我觉得这是我的人
Because
权，我
it
有
was
沉默
my
权。
human right. I had the right to remain silent.
但是当天有5个警察的头，
At the time, there were 5
警察
chiefs of
护
the
着我
police.
他们从晚上7点一直到第2天的中午12点。
From 7 p.m. to noon the next day.
他们这几个人一直骂我、打我，然后说，
请继续。
他说我没有人权。
They kept beating me and swearing at me, saying that I didn't have human rights.
他说现在是共产党当权当政，共产党代表国家。
He said that now the Chinese Communist Party is in charge, and the Chinese Communist Party represents the country.
法轮功就是国家镇压的机器，国家就是镇压法轮功的机器。
The country is a machinery to suppress Falun Gong.
现在对法轮功的政策就是打死双自杀。
And the country's policy towards Falun Gong is that to report all unnatural deaths as suicides.
然后经济上消灭，
To block off,
肉体上消灭，
to annihilate physically,
肉体上消灭，
and to block
所以
financially.
警察，
Yeah.
所以警察跟我说：“你知道你坐的椅子是什么人坐的吗？是死刑犯。”
The policeman asked me.
我坐在审讯椅上，警察指着椅子跟我说
Pointing at the stool I was sitting on, asking me whether I knew what kind of stool I was sitting on. He said, "This is a stool of a death row prisoner."
他说没有几个人能从这里活得出去的。
Not many people who have sat on this chair went out alive.
然后他们是有一个就5个警察，就是一直在这里说我，
There were 5 policemen
说
who
这样的话。
were around me all the time.
有一个警察专门负责打我。
One was in charge of beating me.
那个警察说：“你今天晚上别想回号里边
And he
去。
said, "Don't expect to go back to your cell tonight.
我今晚就睡了你场
I'm
间
going
里。
to sleep with you tonight."
然后他上来扒我的衣服，
And he came up to unbutton my shirt, clothes.
他就是然后也想把我推
And
倒。
wanted to push me, to knock me down.
后来他就没有推倒我，也没有把我的衣服撕下来以后，他用手抓着我的头发，就使劲的扇我的耳朵。
When he saw that he didn't manage, because I resisted, he pulled my hair and slapped me many times.
他用这个手指就不停的戳我这个脸上这个身上这个
He
地方。
poked many places on my face and my body with his finger.
然后我的脸都肿了，手也肿了，腿
And my
也肿
entire
了。
face became swollen, and my hands were so swollen, and other places were swollen as well.
他用他的脚踩在我这个膝盖上，就一直这么扇我耳光，
He
一直这么打我。
pressed his foot on my lap while slapping me
一直
continually.
打我。他说他要把我的内脏掏空了，
And he said,
他要把我的内脏掏空。
he said that he wanted to take out my organs. Sorry, 请继续.
他说然后把我的身体烧掉。
And burn my corpse. 请继续。
是我坐在这个椅子里边，我不能，我坐在这个椅子里边，这个椅子我差不多20个小时，我不能离开椅子，我没有喝水。 我也不能站起来。
I was confined to a chair for 20 hours, and I was denied water and the right to stand up. I couldn't stand up.
其实我当时也是不停的流眼泪，但
I
是
kept weeping,
他们却没有停止。
but they didn't stop torturing me.
后来这个有个警察，后来这个警察的名字叫胡子辉，
There was a policeman whose name was Hu Zihui.
他负责我这个，他就负责一直管我就是每天要审问我。
He was in charge of interrogating me every day.
他拿出一本很厚的，这个大概有这么厚的一个这样的一个本子，这么翻的一个本子。他说
He took out a book, a notebook as big as this, and said,
他说有几百个法轮功，你们这些人都上了这个黑名单了，这是江泽民要求的黑名单。
he said, this is a blacklist of hundreds of Falun Gong practitioners like you, and this blacklist was requested by Jiang Zemin, the president of China.
这是北京市公安局的局长强卫盯着这些事情。
The chief of the Beijing Public Security Bureau ordered these things.
他说你认识里边的某某，清华大学紫光的李某某吗？认识？你要告诉我他在哪里，我抓到他就能拿5万块
He
钱。
asked me if I knew a certain person from Tsinghua University, and whose surname was Li, and if I said yes, he would get 50,000 RMB.
他翻开另一页说：“你认识这个人吗？认识他，抓到他，我能拿3万块钱。”
He asked me, for example, do you know this person? If you do, and I catch him, I'll get 30,000.
当时我写了一篇文章，是叫做《一个法轮功苦心房之死》的这个文章，写到明慧网
At
上
the。time, I wrote an article to publish on Minghui website about a Falun Gong practitioner who was tortured to death in Yunnan province.
他说我写这个文章就要判我7年，因为他说我这就属于泄露国家机密。
He said that if I wrote something like that, I would be sentenced to 7 years in prison because this would constitute betraying state secret. 谢谢你。主席团要问一下问题，法官团想问你一些问题。您的经历都是在2005年之前的，那您能不能说一下，在这之后您怎么流亡到国外的？
就是2005年之前，2005年就是有一个我有一张照片是
I've got this
2005
photo
年的。
and it dates back to 2005.
这个是2005年8月26，我在这个公司上班。
26th of August 2005, I was working at this company.
然后第2天，这个警察去公司里边把我
The
给抓
next
了。
day, the police went to my workplace and arrested me.
抓了以后，这警察就把我送到这个就是一直是2年半的关押吧。
2年半的关押，您说？
对，这次被抓了以后
And
就
this
关押
time
2年半。
I was in prison for 2 years and a half.
我在这个时间很长时间，我就办不到我的身份证被这个警察给没收了。我很长时间我就是没有
They
身份证，
confiscated my
所以我就
ID card, and I didn't have my ID card.
我没有身份证，然后我的户口在这个湖南，我把户口从湖南移到了广东。
My house registration, so-called hukou, was in Hunan province, whereas I had already transferred my hukou to Guangdong province.
广东的警察不知道我是法轮功，所以我就办到身份证，而且办到了护照。
The policeman, the police in Guangdong didn't know I was a Falun Gong practitioner, and that's why I got my ID card. A new ID card. 请继续。
对，有这个护照。对，有护照以后，后来我就想办法出国。
After I got my passport, I figured out a way to get out of the country. 谢谢你。
Thank you. 我还很想补充一个
Sorry, she wants to add
事情。
something. 请说。
就是也是2001年5月份的
It
时
was
候。
also in May 2001.
这个警察把我带到北京市公安局医院。
The police took me to the hospital affiliated to Beijing Public Security Bureau.
这个带我去的这个医院的就是御医吧，新奴，女的新奴。然后我问他，你带我去医院干什么？
The prison doctor who took me there, his surname was Lu, and I asked him why he was taking me to the hospital.
他看着我回答不上来。
He looked at me and couldn't answer.
然后我被带到这个公安医院的这个带到公安医院，我被抽血，然后做一些心电图。 然后做一些这个内脏的检测。
At the Public Security Bureau hospital, I was given physical. I went through physical checks and including cardio, electrogram and checks on my internal organs.
这个公安医院的这个女医生说你的器官太好了，然后就是非常满意的跟她说我的器官太好了。 我当时很生气。
The female doctor said to me that that my organs were in excellent condition, and I was very surprised.
我说你这么满意我的器官，非得要取走我的器官吗？
And I asked,
我当时非常生气。
and asked very angrily, "You're so satisfied with my organs. Are you going to take them away?"
她说没办法，你的心脏太好了。
She said, "I have no other solution. Your heart is too good." 请继续。
我当时很生气，我想立即离开这个医
I was very
院。
angry and I wanted to leave the hospital immediately.
那个医生说你不着急，一会儿还会把你送回去。
The doctor said, "Don't. There's no hurry. They will take you back after."
然后我回来以后，我回来以后我就绝食了，绝食一直瘦的只有60-70斤。 就是你要出现大面积皮下出血。
After I returned, I started my hunger strike, and the result was that I lost a great amount of weight, and I had hemorrhage under my skin.
这个鲁大夫，这个鲁医生来看我说：“你这个大面积出血，你身体出问题了。”
Dr. Lu came to me and said, "Oh, you've got hemorrhage under your skin. Then your body has a problem."
但是他没有给我任何治疗，也没有问我需不需要治疗。
But I didn't receive any treatment, and he never asked me if I needed any treatment.
然后在这期间，这个警察就是还强迫我做一个10个指纹的和手掌的一个手印。
During this time, the police also forced me to leave fingerprints and palm prints, all 10 fingers, both hands.
但是这个纸就是一张这样的 A4的一张纸，一张纸这个。
请说。
这 A4纸的这个上面的名字，是湖南省长沙市，望城区某某莫费南，不是我的名字。 不是我的名字，也不是我的地址，却要我去按10个指纹。
On the A4 sheet of paper that I had to leave my fingerprints and palm prints on, the name was not mine. It belonged to a male person in Hunan province, and despite the fact that it was not my name, they still asked me to leave fingerprints on that paper.
然后这个纸上写了很多文字，没有不准我看。
There was a lot of writing on that paper, and I was not allowed to see it.
我后来我想，这张纸也许是一张，就是说放弃自己器官的那么一个协议，就是一个认
And
可
then
的
I
协
came to
议。
realization that this piece of paper was probably an agreement of a voluntary donation of organs.
但是后来没有在，也可能是因为他认为我已经瘦成那样了，而且身体出问题了，
后来没有怎么？
就是没有在，就是一直说在器官。
They never came again, probably because I was very skinny, very thin, and had a lot of problems. 请问？
就是我们每次对，还是就说我们每次抽血的时候，在抽血以前，我们的名字都被编成代码。
Before every session of blood drawing, our names we were tagged, we were numbered.
然后这个代码是贴好在这个试管上
On the
边。
test tube, on the test tubes, there were our numbers stuck on them. 请说。
所以我们抽血以后，这个医生看到的数据都是代码，没有真实的名字是他们写
So
在
the
本子
doctors
上面。
could only see our numbers rather than our names. 请说。
我要可以说多长时间？
She's asking how long she can go on, and if you want to ask questions. 他们还有其他的问题。
Okay, thank you.
他想问你的是2010他比较感兴趣的是2001年9月18号的，您在您的这个写的这个证明上面说，那一天7个人，您自己、刘青青、秦鹏、吴香问，然后里面有2个人是好像是大学的教授，那是不是这里所有的人都是法轮功的学员？
对。
All of them 吗？
对。
你知不知道他们的下落是怎么样？
有一个失踪了。
One of them disappeared. 其他人知道吗？
有一个出国了。
Sorry, she said one disappeared, and then afterwards she added that one left China.
嗯，
您还写到在2001年的12月份这一段里面，在北京的女子劳教所，还有这里有200多名特警啊，有什么头盔啊、靴子啊，还有电棍啊之类的。那因为你们都是比较就是身体都是比较微弱的，那您怎么解释就是说他们要用这么大的强度来管理你们？
这是好像就是就是这应该是就是说针对法轮功来的，就是一个是看我们当时不是有一个女的老人家，她喊法轮大法好，像这样的情况的话，这些特警就扑上去。有可能有4个特警、6个特警扑上去以后，就把他拖走了。
This is specifically against Falun Gong practitioners in case something happened. For example, you may have read that there was an elderly lady who shouted Falun Gong, Falun Dafa is good, and in such occasions, the riot police would come to sort out the problem. .您刚才在刚开始的时候说的，您被就是说，连夜审问，一段时间，是吧
？Yeah.
So did you want to know how many days she was interrogated? 这个流水讯问的方法是不是特别的普遍？
对，我当时是在那里的时候，就是基本上是好多个晚上，有20个晚上我在那里被审讯，然后别的屋也在审讯，他们打人的声音很大，拿着那个棒子打人，打得砰砰响，然后我说这是不是在打哪个法轮功？警察说是的。
When I was being questioned continuously for 20 nights and 20 days, I would often hear other people being beaten in the rooms next to me, and I asked the policeman if they were beating Falun Gong practitioners. The policeman said yes. 谢谢您，非常感谢您。
Thank you.
这个对你来说不容易，我们也理解。
当时最困难的不是觉得他那一天难过，是因为我们关在这个屋里边，这屋里边有些死刑犯、杀人的、无期的，所以他们天天也在说你是不是也要被判无期，你是不是也要被判死刑？所以当时感觉到好像自己就是跟死刑，好像也是那么就是走不过去的。
The most difficult thing is not that, but it's to remember that we were put together, we were treated in the same way as death row prisoners, and is to remember that I felt like one at the time. 他们问题问完了。
Okay, thank you.
再次感谢你。
Thank you. 谢谢。
谢谢你，谢谢你。
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next witness is Mr. George Karimi.
And he's, I think, a live witness.
Yes.
He's a witness in person.
In person. Everybody's alive. Another.
I didn't make sense.
Can you get Mr.
Consent from somebody about the murder?
Mr. Karimi. George Karimi. Thank you, Mr. Karimi. Can you state your name, please?
Karimi.
Thank you for coming to the tribunal to give evidence. Please remember that it's important you tell us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Mr. Karimi, you're a Swedish national.
I'm a Swedish national.
In 2003, you were imprisoned in China because of a false statement, and you were condemned to life imprisonment. Was there a judicial proceedings where you were found guilty?
In 2003, I can say that I was taken by Beijing customs. So I had got a telephone call that I have to go and meet a friend. So when I went there were a lot of civilians and few police. So that day I was arrested. I was taken to the detention center. And when I asked the police what's the reason, they told me it's resisting arrest. I said, they cannot be resisting arrest. Just I walked to the apartment and you have arrested me. So nearly 1.5 months, it was written resisting arrest, or they were telling me that. Then after that, for nearly 4 or 5 months, they said that it's money laundering, and on the 7th month, they said that it's counterfeiting. So in the court also, if we talk about the system, I mean the court system and lawyers, I can say it like this, I had private lawyer. So the lawyers there in China, they cannot defend anybody because the judge doesn't give the right. And before we went to the court, so 2 weeks before that, already in the detention center, I knew that I have got life sentence. So it was just formality, we can say. Just I went there. It didn't take 5 or 10 minutes. They read it, you have got life sentence. It was as if they are distributing chocolates or something. So it was all the process. Then we went to the High Court, which we had just complained. So in the High Court, I took up the case, and I saw that the lawyer cannot defend me properly. So I asked the judges, I said, why I'm being arrested? They told me that it's for counterfeit money. I said, okay, that's very good. I want to place a question. How many interrogation did I have? They said nearly 7 or 8. I said, okay, if I'm being arrested for such a crime, and I have been 7 or 8 times interrogated, please go through all the interrogation. There was not a single question about money. So the judge said, no, it's like this. I said, you can check. If there's any question about money, counterfeit money or anything, give me that sentence, not life sentence. So they adjourned the court for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, the judges came and they said, it doesn't matter, we continue. So it was in that way. I couldn't defend myself. My embassy couldn't do anything. They were totally, how you say, powerless, we can say. No, I mean the embassies, we had some inmates from America, we had from Canada. I mean, American embassy could not do anything, so what was Swedish embassy? So it's like once somebody is going in that system, it doesn't matter how much embassy is behind that person. It's finished. I mean, the police decides, and the person, he gets the sentence. That's all.
That's correct. In 2005 to 2006, you had a number of conversations with one of the wardens in prison through a Taiwanese inmate of you. Can you explain to the tribunal the discussion you had in these cases?
See, the detention center where I was, I mean, the minimum sentence somebody could get, it was between 15 to 20 years. So most of the people, I mean the inmates, either they had life sentence, as I said, because it's police who is deciding. So they knew exactly to which detention center they have to take the person. So in our detention center, either it was death sentence, 2 years suspicion of death sentence, life sentence, or 20 years. So it was very common. The guards, they were not afraid to disclose something. So most of the time, I mean, the guard who was in charge of my cell, he was calling me and a friend. So he was discussing about Europe and other things. So exactly today also when I was hearing in the discussions, exactly 2006, it was the most sensitive year when the organ harvesting question came up in Chinese detention centers. And our detention center, because it was the most, we can say, I mean, the people who were getting sentenced, it was very high. So it was very common among the prisoners, especially Chinese prisoners. So they were discussing about organ harvesting. But in 2006, it became general. So I was talking to the guard. We used to go to his room. He was inviting to cigarette, and he was discussing about Europe. He wanted to know about Europe. So I placed a question about organ harvesting. And, you know, for him, it was very simple. He said they are going to be executed. So what does it matter if we remove the organs or no? So I was shocked. I mean, but did you get any permission from them? No. They are criminals and they have to be executed. So most of the execution, it was taking place in the detention center and not in the prison, because those people, they were never reaching to the prison. They were being executed in the detention center. So we knew that there were two places where they had to execute. Either it was in the detention center or it was in the court. In the court, they had special place, but most of the time it was in the detention center. So we were discussing, and for the Chinese also, I can say it like this, no Chinese is going to donate organs, because if we look to their tradition and these things, they believe in reincarnation. And they say that nobody can be reborn if some organs are missing in the body. So most of these prisoners who were being executed, I mean, the guards openly, they were telling us, we are removing their organs. So, and once also what happened, we were discussing about this matter, I think maybe 4 or 5 times. So he took up the matter of Falun Gong members, that there were 24 or 25 Falun Gong members from one province, that they have executed them and taken their organs. I said, I mean, like this, just simply they have been executed. No, one of them they didn't execute because he or she was sick. So, I mean, it was a very common thing. It wasn't something to be secret. And they knew that anybody comes out of that place, it could take 15 years. So they didn't bother to speak the truth.
Mr. Karimi, did you know how the executions took place? Did they shoot them, hang them, or any other way of execution?
I asked the officer, and everybody knew that if somebody is being executed, so we were having some, we can say, cards to purchase food and other things, which it was limited to 300 yuan a month. So if anybody was going to be executed, they were removing 20 yuan from his account. It was for the bullet which they had to shoot him. They had to shoot him. So everybody knew 20 yuan, they were removed from the card of person who will be executed. So if I was with nearly nine persons who were executed the day after. So we were in the second floor. On the first floor, it was the death row. So in the beginning, we were together with the people who were from the death row. Then we foreigners, we made a lot of complaint because mentally it was disturbing. One is sitting with a person who has to be executed. So in the end, all the European embassies, they started to complain, and some other embassies, so they shifted them to the first floor. So first floor was where they were executing the prisoners, and it was by shooting in the hand. And once I asked the officer, so he told me if any officer, he will execute a prisoner, he will get 2 weeks of vacation with salary. It was what they were getting.
You were eventually sent to Sweden to serve the rest of your term. Is that correct?
There was a lot of negotiation from not only Sweden, it was from other places also for my transfer. And I was, I think, the first foreigner who was transferred, although Sweden didn't have any treaty with China. But there was a lot of negotiations, and I could be transferred in 2010.
And you were released in 2015?
Yeah.
Thank you. There will be questions from the tribunal now.
Thank you, Mr. Karimi. I have a couple of questions about the time that you shared a cell with a former Chinese Communist Party official.
Yeah.
Did you know his name?
Yeah, he has been executed, Matthew. His English name was Matthew. He was executed 2006, if I'm not mistaken, end of 2006, yeah.
End of 2006.
Yeah.
That time. And you mentioned that you had conversations about organ harvesting with him. Do you recall any details of those conversations?
I told you, he was from Chinese Communist Party, and he was having very high position in the party before he was arrested. So he was explaining everything for me, not only with him, I was with the deputy minister also. We were together, so 3 of us, we were together. So they were explaining everything for me, for example, how they take the party members to see execution. And organ harvesting, it was, as I said, it was very common issue there. It was not something to hide or not to speak about it.
And also you referred to the talks amongst the prisoners, the inmates, about organ harvesting.
Yeah, it was known as a monster prison detention, yeah.
Yeah, and do you remember any particular reference to any particular religious or ethnic minority groups?
I can say it like this. If somebody is a Falun Gong member, it is already a crime. The person cannot defend. We had sometimes few persons in my cell, Chinese, when they entered in the cell, honestly, they didn't know how dangerous it is. For example, they started to sit the way they are practicing. So the only thing I could do, I could say, listen, don't do that before they transfer you to other place. I know what it is, but don't do that. So until Falun Gong members, they didn't know how dangerous it is or what they will do with them. So the number one, I can say, it was Falun Gong members who were being prosecuted. Then it was Uyghur people and Tibetans, these 3 people. The 4th one, which I met in the detention, it was the Christians. But if I have to say, number 1, it was Falun Gong, because they were the only people who were protesting against the system in the detention center. Otherwise, other people, they didn't dare to do it. So Falun Gong and foreigners. So what they were doing, they had separated both Falun Gong and foreigners, so they will not be together. It will be a big problem for the detention center to control. So I was with 2 or 3 Falun Gong members, but we were having most of the time Chinese inmates who were coming from other section where they were holding Falun Gong members. So they were telling us everything what is happening with those people. And about the Muslims, for example, we had 3 or 4 Muslims in our cell. And the police was using mostly the prisoners to punish other prisoners. This was a system which they were using, and it was it could cover their crime also. For example, for foreigners, they could say it was a fight between inmates. So it's very simple. The police didn't do one inmate has done. So for Muslims, generally they were telling other Chinese, try to force them to eat pork, pork meat and these things. Tibetans, the same thing. But yeah, it was this. Christians, just I think it was 2004, 4 or 5 I met. But Christians just, it was, they were calling underground churches, and so I saw only 1 or 2, but mostly it was Falun Gong members.
Have you seen any children amongst them, your inmates?
No, there was no children. We were in the foreign section, and in that, they were trying to hide everything from foreigners because we were the only people who could pass messages to the embassies. So we had become very sensitive for Chinese government.
But you shared the cell with Falun Gong's.
Excuse me?
You shared the cells with Falun Gong's practitioners. So have you witnessed any, at any time they were taken to hospitals for medical examinations or something?
Really, I don't want to remember what I heard from hospital. I don't want. I didn't see, but I heard. So it it was horrible. What they told me, it was a French citizen. So he told me he was with some Falun Gong members in the hospital. And that hospital, it's a military or police hospital, but underground they have a place for inmates. So he was telling me that he was admitted there for 2 or 3 weeks. He was from my cell. When he came back and he explained to me what is happening in that hospital, I can say it was a nightmare. So it was against Falun Gong members. How they are, for example, in one case, just one case, and after that I don't want to remember more. He told me that they had opened the person's stomach, so, and the way they had stitched, when he was coughing, he was saying, George, I was seeing the blood jumping up and down. So, and he had told the doctor, I want to go back to the detention center. So when they became to know that, then he had told the officer that I'm going to complain to the embassy. He's saying after that, immediately they removed me to other section because I couldn't manage in that hospital. Myself, personally, I didn't, but my cellmate, when he came from hospital, he explained for me.
One of my colleagues wanted to know that if you have heard anything about the quota that the prison guards had to meet for the numbers of the Falun Gong prisoners who repented or defied their faith.
See, in China, everything is a business. Everything is a business. And how they work, the Chinese government, I mean, when somebody will look to their system, it's a bonus system. So this is very important. I mean, the way they controlled, the way they were controlling the inmates, and the way the authorities were controlling their officers, everything was bonus. For example, if an inmate is behaving well, he will get 5 points. So everything was point. It was the same for inmate. It was the same for the officer. Whole the system, when I was talking to the Chinese officials, I mean those who were in the detention center, and everything was point system. For example, if officer, he has been able, yes, I saw few times when they brought a Falun Gong member and they said that now he has regretted, and this is only, I can say, propaganda. You know, Chinese government, in one thing, they are expert. They can show something to the world and what is the reality. So in these things, they are expert. I mean, they can make such things, such a, how you say, propaganda, which I don't think so Hollywood can do. So it's not something new for me because I have gone through it and I have seen it.
Any questions?
I hope you won't mind me asking, given how hard hearing about the hospital was, but when you talked about the people being executed by shooting, and you hear the stories of organ donation, were those two events simultaneous, and or were medical staff involved, to your knowledge?
No, it was not medical stuff. For example, Mr. Matthew, my friend who was executed, I mean, he was in my cell. They were saying that outside, once I have seen, I cannot say, it was what I heard. They were bringing us back from the court to the detention center. So we saw a van standing there. It was a white one, and it was quite big. So my Chinese friend told me, George, you know what? See, there is the execution, and here is where they are harvesting. But I never saw a doctor, I mean, openly to say or to speak about that. But among the Chinese, you know, mostly it was the prison guards who were talking about these things. I mean, it was very strange for me. You know, it was not something secret. It was not secret at all. I mean, openly they were talking to the Chinese inmates, and they were telling us what is happening, what they are doing.
Just to follow that, when you describe the number of people being moved to floor for their execution, how near or far would they have been either from the hospital or from another place where medical operations could be performed?
It was in the detention center.
In the same building?
It was in the same building. I mean, when we entered to the detention center, they told us, they said, here is the execution, because sometimes they use the prisoners, inmates, which the police, I mean, trusts them to draw the, to bring the prisoner for execution. So, or people who were working in the clinic, we can say, or in the kitchen, they knew more than us who had been isolated. So all the information we were picking up from those people.
But the executions could be close to the place where there could be medics, is that right?
It was exactly on the first floor of our detention center, the execution place.
We entirely understand that you don't want to revisit in detail the events in the hospital. Two questions. First of all, have you ever set that down in writing anywhere?
Excuse me?
The detail of what happened in the hospital that is so distressing to remember. Have you set it down in writing anywhere?
I have written a book. I have written, I think, in that.
And it's in that book, is it?
I think I have written in my book.
And because if you decide that you'd like us to have that narrative, whether through a book or through another statement, please let the...
I will write this that and I will send it.
And that would be very helpful for us. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to help us.
Thank you very much.
By giving evidence. Mr. Sabi, sorry, Nick, did you want to... No. Mr. Sabi, I think we're now due for a break, aren't we?
Yes, we are, sir.
It's what's called a tea break, but I'm afraid I don't know that tea is that available. We've got about another 2 hours of evidence, which of course takes us quite late on a Saturday evening. But not only is the giving of evidence in public valuable for us, but the public are of value to the witnesses because they show that which they give at some pain and difficulty is being respected. So I do hope that you won't find our lack of hospitality for you off-putting at this time of the day, and we'll see you in half an hour's time